Okay, so welcome everyone. This is a tutorial for Chinese equity markets on the 29th of September 2018. I'm going to make a video record of today's session. I don't do that every time. Normally I do that under two circumstances. First one is when someone has a compelling reason to be absent and they need to have. So I don't always do it. But the second reason, which is the reason for today, is when I feel that a topic or the material may be a little bit complex for you to understand in class. So I think when you are able to go home and review it in your own time, it might be helpful. My recommendation for you is this, okay? Uh, don't don't go home and watch the whole thing from beginning to end. I mean, you can if you want to, but what you can do is when I'm talking about something and if you feel you have lost track of what I'm saying, you make a note of the time on the top right hand corner. And when you go home, when you get to that point, that would be exactly the point where you are a little bit lost and you can just go from there. Okay, that is a better use of your time. Otherwise, you're going to you'll be spending 3 hours instead of an hour and a half. Okay, now, actually, the first session of this tutorial was recorded also, and it's already online um, in YouTube. Okay, but that was I think 3 days ago. So I'm doing this again, but you can relate to this better because you were here. Okay, but you can watch the other one too if you really want to. Now, what I like to do today, so I hope that will be helpful. So what I like to do today actually is I was hoping to go through some in-class assignments, especially 4 and 5 and 6 and 7. I received a question earlier from one of you, and I want to thank you for writing to me, which I think really sort of sums up a lot of the confusion that I sense some people are having. I think when you put events and concepts on a timeline, it will be a lot easier to understand. So that's what I would try to do today. Now, just by way of admin, so today we've done that and that and that, done this, and now you are here. Okay, it's the second tutorial, but we are in week 3. Next week, actually, we are not meeting on the 1st of October. We're meeting on the 2nd, but that doesn't concern you. Okay. Yeah. Just a reminder to you that the exam is scheduled for the afternoon of November 24. So starting at the usual time when the lecture normally starts, in the afternoon of November 24. Okay. So next lecture is obviously in the afternoon. Now, assignment 1, please hand it in at the start of the lecture. If you want to give it to me after this tutorial, you can do that too. It's fine, okay? It just has to be before 2:30. So Paul McGuinness is very insistent on that, okay? Do not hand it in the middle of a lecture, okay? He won't be happy with that because he's going to start talking about parts of the assignment, and we don't know whether you'll be writing the answers, during lecture. So give it to him or me at the start, okay? Everyone is okay with that? Yeah? All right. Now, this is a question. Oh. The question I want to share with you is this one. So just take a minute to read this, okay? Dear Sam, sorry to bother you. You don't have to always start your email by saying sorry. Right? After the lecture last week, I'm quite confused about the timeline of IPO clawback, over allocation and over allotment. Which is the first and which is last? Can you explain the process and timeline in detail to us? Yes, I can, and I did in the last session. I will do it again here. Okay. If you have any questions or queries, like I said, either you note the time there, or better still, you put your hand up and you stop me, and you let me know if something is unclear. Okay. I think it's very important because if you are lost here, then you're going to find the rest of the course a little bit hard. Okay? And to flip that around, if you are okay with what I'm going to tell you today, I think the rest of the course isn't really that bad. Okay? Besides, I cannot figure out the meaning of clawback and over allocation. Why we need a clawback? Why the over allocation is good for every party? I just think that over allocation may cause a dilution effect on the controller shareholder if global coordinators choose to exercise the green shoe to close out. It's a good point. The reason I really enjoy receiving your questions is that one of the reasons is actually you ask me things I never thought about. Okay, I never thought about it like that. So the second paragraph, basically the question is why, if you over allocate, if you sell an additional 15% of shares, why is that good? You sell more shares, you are diluting the the voting rights of the existing parties. It is true. But anyway, we'll get on to that. Does everyone can understand the questions? Yeah. Okay. Now, let me open up my notebook and. So it goes like this. So these are the notes I made last time. I'll do it again. Okay. Now, actually, the IPO, the initial public offering for a company, is not as complicated as you think. It's just that there are a lot of terms flying around. And I think a diagram or a timeline is always useful. So the first thing I will do is the actual IPO date. The actual day when a company's stock are listed on an exchange and becomes tradable, publicly tradable. Okay, now IPO is a very, you got to remember, as you probably know by now, IPO is a very momentous event for a company. Okay, so before you were a private company, private in the sense that ownership is not publicly traded. I mean, all companies are private unless they are government owned. I don't mean private in that sense. I mean private in the sense that you are not listed, you are not traded. Okay, so you started a business and you borrow some money, you buy assets, you run your business, it's doing well, and you're making money, it gets bigger and bigger. And then 3-5 years later, you decided to take it to the market. That's IPO, as you know, okay, in a nutshell. And then the reason people do IPOs, I guess there are a number of reasons, but the two strongest ones that I can think of, you become a recognizable, you are a brand now, you are a public company, you are a listed company, and you have recognition and market and brand visibility makes a big difference. But the second reason is that once you do the IPO and you've got onto the platform, so to speak, of a stock exchange, then in the future, it provides an additional avenue and a very important and very powerful avenue for you to get additional equity funding. Okay, so IPO is not the beginning and the end. IPO is just the beginning. Okay, so from time to time you can go back to the equity market and do what are called sometimes they're called seasoned offerings. Sometimes they're called follow-on offerings. Okay, so you can sell shares to investors, additional shares. Okay, so that is a very flexible and powerful and robust means of raising funds. Okay, now, so I divide everything into what happens before and after. Okay, so long time ago, so you are still a private company. Okay, so private company, and then once you decide to, or you are interested to take the company public, then you have to engage the iBanks for discussions. Well, it's not just the iBanks. You need accountants as well. You need auditors, and you need regulators. Okay, so you for discussions, and then you're going to file some documents, and then you do what's called due diligence. Now, there are actually a lot more steps, but I just tell you the key ones here. Okay, so you do due diligence and make sure everything is properly reported. All the books, all the accounts are checked out, and everything is properly filed. And what you can do at the next stage is you talk about pricing. So the iBanks will go out there and talk to their customers, the investor clients, to see what is the interest in your IPO. Okay, now a lot closer to the date. So this is a kind of or maybe you do road. Okay, you might do like road shows. Okay, and then so a bit closer. So now we may be, just a couple of months before. Okay, so you are going to issue the prospectus, and then you're going to take orders and subscriptions. Now, when I say take orders and subscriptions, I deliberately use two words here. Okay, subscription would mean and at this point in time, I mean, don't take my description here too seriously. It may not be linear and there are things happening simultaneously, but I'm trying to describe to you the key events, okay? So here you also would have an indicative price range. And let's say you want to IPO something for, okay, I'll just keep it simple. So 1,000 million shares at $10 a share, something like that. Okay, so you're going to raise $10 billion. So the price, the indicative range will be, let's say, between 10 and 12. Okay. I think there are legislations governing that when you have an indicative price range, you cannot be substantially, you cannot say, oh, my price range is between 10 and 12, and suddenly you sell your stocks at 17. I don't think you can do that, okay? But there are guidelines on how far you can deviate. But don't worry about that for now, okay? So you have an indicative price range, and when you issue your prospectuses and you take orders, that is all you can do. Okay, you don't have a price at that moment in time. You don't have an actual IPO launching price. Okay, is everyone okay with that? Yeah. Now, so what happens after that? You take orders and you take subscriptions, and by orders, I'm thinking of institutional clients. So you know how there are two tranches, right? There is the so-called international tranche, and there is the local tranche. I'll tell you why I say local. There are different. Now, I've said this to you 1,000 times. This is the 1,001st time, okay? In finance, you have so many different terms describing the same thing. I am going to give you another example here. So the international tranche versus the local tranche, sometimes it's called the institutional tranche. Institutional versus retail. That's why I reserve the word retail, okay? So if you are not institutional, you are retail. You know what? I learned another description the other day, okay? And I think lawyers sometimes are using it. The placing tranche versus the subscription tranche. Trust me, some people do describe it like this. Is it making sense to you? All of these are talking about the same thing, okay? So basically it's big versus small, okay? So institution is big, international is big. Institution can be a local institution, so the word international actually is a little bit misleading. It can be a big fund manager in town. Okay? Is that local? International? It's institutional. That much I know, okay? It's also the placing tranche. Now, so when I talk about taking orders, I am talking about the placing tranche on the left-hand side. Now, what does taking orders, what does that mean? So let's say you have a lot of funds out there. So Fund A is happy to buy 50 million shares at let's say $11. They will tell you that, okay? You tell them the price range, and they tell you how much they are happy to buy and at what price. They might even tell you, well, if it was $10, I'm happy to buy 75 million. They can say that. Okay, now this is what I mean by order or taking order. Okay, there's a lot more flexibility. So they are not so that's why it's called a placing tranche. The iBanks are trying to place big parcels to big institutional clients, one after another. Everyone is okay so far? All right, now you may have Fund B. So Fund B has a different perspective. So they are very, very positive on this company. So they say, I buy 100 million shares at $12. So they're going all out. They want to buy a lot, and they want to buy at the top of the price range. Now, maybe you're wondering, why don't they say 10? You'll see in a moment why they don't. Why don't you just go in with the cheapest price? Okay, it's like any auction. If you want to pay a low price, it's your choice, but you may not get what you want. Okay, so you got Fund C. Maybe they want to buy 65 million, and they want to buy that at, let's say, 10.50, and so on and so forth. Okay, and Fund D maybe wants to buy 120 million shares at $11. Okay, now you're going to get, now these are orders or indication of interest. So when you add them all up, so I don't know how many funds you're going to get, maybe, hundreds, thousands. When you add them all up, you don't know what number will be here, but hopefully it would exceed the number of shares that are on offer. Now, I said to you above that the IPO is for 1,000 shares. I said that, okay? And then the indicative price is between $10 and $12. Now, when I say 1,000 million, okay, 1,000 million. So first of all, by law, you are allowed to increase that to up to 15%, which will make it 1,150. Now, the actual final number of shares that are sold has to be at least this one, okay? It cannot be less than that. Maybe you're wondering, what if no one is interested? What happens if no one is in, if not enough people buy? What happens then? Thank you. Specifically, it's the iBanks who call themselves the underwriter. Okay, so the underwriting iBanks, not all of them, but you will see that in the prospectus who is the underwriter. So if you are an underwriter and the market doesn't take up all the shares, you have to do it. So it's not a joke. It's a big risk to take. You buy all those shares and then they don't sell. The shares will sit on your book, and you might even be staring at a loss. Okay? So if you are an underwriter, so typically if you are an underwriter, you are also one of the involved parties, or maybe the global coordinator. So you better make sure you don't price it too aggressively. If the market is not interested, you're stuck, and it's your risk. Okay. But anyway, so the final number of shares, if you call that X, it has to be in between these two. Okay, but there is some flexibility. You can sell up to an additional 15%. Okay, now at the same time, when this is all happening on the placing tranche, the subscription, that refers to the retail market, okay, where you don't have a say on what price you want to buy. You are a price taker, basically. You just know that the price, the IPO price, hopefully will be somewhere between 10 and 12. But you don't know because you're just a small investor. So you will go to a bank and you fill in a form and you tell them, okay, I want to buy 500 shares or 1,000 shares or whatever. Okay, that's it. You don't name a price. And then, so you got investor 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so millions of people, and they will all buy 100 shares and 500 shares and 300 shares, whatever. Okay, so you can add them up as well. Now, so I'm still talking about this part. Okay, now about one week, I think it's 1 week, so minus 7 days before the IPO is when the subscription will start. Yes. Okay. The question is, where does this 15% come from? Because I'll come to that in a moment. Okay. In fact, I'm coming to that right now. Now there will be two things happening after the subscription to the public, and by that I mean the general retail investing. After that closes, which I think is around 7 days before the IPO. Now, two things will happen. The first thing is what we call the clawback. Actually, it's going to be a very busy week for everybody. Three things will happen. First is what we call the clawback. Now, so let's say when you add up all of these, so by default, the standard allocation, as you know, is 90% international and 10% local. So that means they would target to have 900 million shares sold to international, I'm going to stick to, I think, the one in the middle. I'm going to call them institutional versus retail. So 900 to institutional and 100 to retail. Now that is the standard allocation to start with, depending on how much you actually receive here. Okay, so maybe you receive 500 million subscription. So it's way oversubscribed. So when it's oversubscribed, some of this will go over there. So it could become 80-20 or 70-30. Now, the details of that actually is in a simple table that Paul was showing you. Okay, but it's always taking from one pool and pouring it into the other one. So they will always add up to 1,000. Is everyone okay with that? That is the so-called clawback, and that actually can happen sort of one week before the IPO, because by that time you already know the total retail subscription. So you cannot determine the clawback unless you know how oversubscribed the retail part is, if it is oversubscribed. So now you know, so you can determine. Okay, but I said to you that there will be an additional 150 million shares. Now, So this is the thing about the IPO. So let's say if I was to draw the balance sheet, so this is the original balance sheet, and now they're issuing new share, let's say it's all new shares, all of them. So they will be issuing another 1,000 million shares. So they're going to get additional funds. So it will sit as cash, at least on the first day. Now, you can potentially end up issuing another 15%. That may well happen. So when you ask me where do those shares come from? They can be new shares. Okay. And I think if these are not entirely new shares, so I'll give you an example. I mean, I run the risk of confusing you, but I'm happy to run that risk. So let's say 700 are new shares, and then 300 are old shares. Then when the additional shares are sold or allocated, then there will be 15% from this, which is 105 and 45, for example. So you may, okay, this 105 is here, okay, so 105. And then the existing shareholders, maybe they were thinking to sell 300, they may be prepared to sell more. So that is the 45. That's one way to do it. Is everyone okay with that? All right, now, so the clawback will happen within this week when you know for sure what is the degree of oversubscription on the retail part. Now, the so-called over-allocation will happen sometime within 48 or maybe even just 24 hours before. So what is going to happen now? I'll tell you what will happen. So let's say there is a clawback and we are now going to split that 1 billion shares, not in a 90-10 proportion, but let's say 70-30, okay? So 300 million will go to the retail and 700 million will go to institutional. Now, you are going to add another 150. Yeah. This is the so-called over allocation at this point in time. Okay. So all in all, you are planning to sell 850 to the institutional side. Okay. We are now at 34 minutes. So this is now when things get interesting. So after you've done the clawback, the over allocation will happen somewhere around. So there will be a lot of intense negotiations closer to the date, okay? And literally the night before, so I'm talking like 8 or 12 hours before the actual IPO, okay, the night before, you are going to get the whole syndicate So IPO date is this one. So the night before, now the entire, it's called a syndicate. Syndicate will meet the night before the IPO. Now, by that time, people are already quite clear about, what is the market interest and what is the current market sentiment. And hopefully, when you collect all the institutional orders, it would come to, let's say it comes to 4,000 million. So I told you that we are only able to offer 700 plus that 150. Now this is the so-called over allocation. So that becomes 850. So you have a demand of 4,000, but I'm going to supply, so this is the demand, but the supply is going to be 850. In fact, originally it was going to be 700, okay? So hopefully this is what happens. Then, so you can see there is not enough to go around, even at the institutional level. So what do you do? Now what you do is this. So the syndicate, which is the representative from all, the senior representative from all the banks, including the lead underwriters, the global coordinators. Now, they are the ones who have more muscles because they are the ones carrying a lot of the orders, and they're the ones taking the underwriting risk. So they will all be sitting around in a table with the client. Okay, the client means the issuer, the company that is going IPO. Okay, so the client will be there. The investors won't be there. Okay, and then there'll be lots of coffee. Okay, and pizzas, whatever. They will sit down. They will talk. Now, what do they talk about? It's not very scientific, by the way. I don't mind telling you. So you don't have a set formula saying it should be this price. For example, if you look at just this one here, they may say, all right, we are going to price our IPO at, let's say, $10.50. So everybody will get that price. Okay, so that means Fund C will get the shares 65 million at 10.50. Fund A will get 50 million shares at 10.50. Fund B will get them at 10.50. Now, Fund B would be happy to buy 100 million shares at 10.50 because they're happy to buy at 12, but not the other way around. Okay, and then Fund D will get the shares. So everybody gets something. But let's say you price it at 11. So you're going to price your IPO at 11. So everybody gets their shares at 11. Now that means Fund A will get 50 million at 11. Fund B will get 100 million shares at 11. Fund C is going to miss out. They don't get anything. I'm sorry, your order was too low. Okay, and Fund D will also get something at 11. Maybe there was another order. Let's say Fund E. Fund E is happy to buy 70 million shares at 11.50. And let's say they decide that the IPO price should be 11.50. Okay, then Fund A will miss out. Fund B will get 100 million shares at 11.50. Fund C will miss out. Fund D will miss out, and Fund E will get the shares. Do you see what's going on here? Okay, now, like I said, this is not scientific, but it's a fascinating process because you want to price from the client's point of view. Of course, you want as high a price as possible, but from the investor's point of view, you want to have as low a price as possible. And if you are the iBank, you are stuck in the middle. You don't want to be in favor of either the client or the investor. If you actually upset either party, then it's going to make your life very difficult in the future. Okay, so you don't want to do that. So it takes a lot of negotiation skills. Sorry, there was someone put their hand up. Yes. Yeah. What if they cannot sell all the shares? You have to remember, I've only got A, B, C, D, E. This list should go on, so there will be hundreds, thousands of funds. I'm not saying there are only 5 funds. So when you add them all together, the sum total, and I made the hypothetical estimate here. So the sum total is 4,000. So that actually exceeds what you have. So you're asking, what if this number, when you add them together, is like 600? That's what you're asking. And sorry, I'm worried I answered the question wrong. What do you mean? 13. Okay. She's saying, what if you offer at 13 and you do not have enough institutional investors buying at 13? My answer is you won't do that. You won't do that. Okay. You are shooting yourself in the head if you do that. Okay. Because that means the underwriters will be taking the part that is unsold onto their books. You'll be out of your mind to do that. Okay. So you won't. But I thought you meant even the total amount of institutional subscription does not exceed the supply. Now that actually can happen. If it's a very, very poor IPO, then the underwriters will need to come to the rescue. Now, this is the part where you sort of over allocate on purpose. Okay, this is the over allocation, and then the night before they meet, and then they would determine the IPO price at that point. Yeah. Yeah, sure. You have a follow-on question. Yeah. 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 She's saying that it seems to be quite mechanical. The way that if you go to an auction for a French painting in Christie's or Sotheby's, it's very mechanical. The highest bidder gets the painting. The reason it looks like this is because I describe it very simple. In real life, a number of things can happen. So you can have, for example, many people bidding at the maximum price of 12. Okay, so even at $12, there's not enough shares to go around. That can happen, first of all. Okay, so in that case, the different iBanks, they actually have to negotiate. So I am Morgan Stanley, and the client behind me, BlackRock, wants to buy 100 million shares. You are JP Morgan, and the client behind you, Templeton, wants to do the same. And there's just not enough to go around. So you and I, we have to negotiate on what to do. Okay, and it can be quite intense, but it's not. So like I said, it can be very scientific, but it doesn't have to be. By the way, if you are interested, I'll tell you one more detail. Sometimes the same client can give an order. So I'm BlackRock. Yeah, exactly. So I give an order to JP Morgan, and I also give an order to Morgan Stanley. I also give an order to HSBC or whatever. Okay. And then you sit round in a table. Oh, the client has placed 2 orders. Okay. So now you got to sort that out as well. So they do that on purpose. They are allowed to. So it can be very simple, but it doesn't have to be. Okay. And it's usually, the complication arises when you may not want to price it at 12, okay? Because if the price of an IPO is too high, there is always a risk that it will fall, on the IPO day. So let's say you price it at 11. If you decide, and if the client is okay with that, if the client is okay for you to price at 11, the client says, okay, no problem. Then at 11, maybe there are still a lot more demand than supply. Okay? Or maybe the client says, let's price it at 10.50. Okay? Maybe the client knows there are some issues with the company. So the client says, I'm quite happy you price at 10.30. Don't think they always want the maximum price. It's not that simple. Okay? So they say, okay, price at 10.30. And at 10.30, a lot of people can buy. Okay? Then you have to allocate. When you say how much money you have, who is you? The retail subscribers? The institutional, yeah. In the end, it is a question of supply and demand, and trying to find a balance between selling at a very high price and selling too expensive or selling too cheap. So neither is good. If you don't think that, oh, they just sell at the highest possible, then investors will be very upset. And next time they don't play with you. Okay? Or so another thing to tell you also. So let's say the issuer is very greedy. Let's say they are, okay? So they price the IPO really aggressively, right at $12, okay? And then the IPO doesn't go very well, okay? So next time when they want to do a season offer, let's say 1 year later, investors will remember, okay, these guys, okay, I remember what happened last time, okay? I'm not in. So you don't want that to happen, okay? So the IPO is not the beginning and the end. Now, so after you do that, so on the actual IPO day, you have a price. Let's say 11. So this is the actual price that the stock is going to start trading at 9 a.m. in the morning or 9:30. When the bell rings, the first price will be this one. Okay, that's the price at which the shares are launched. Now, so we have talked about clawback and over allocation, but it doesn't stop there. There's a final step. Yes. The cornerstones will be fairly early. I think the cornerstones will be when you are taking orders. Yeah. Well, yeah, quite early. So you want to go around and tell people that there are cornerstone investors. Now, I think this is what we call the price stabilization period, which typically lasts for 21 days after the IPO or 30 days after the retail subscription is closed. So either 21 days from between here and here, or 30 days between here and maybe here. Something like that. Okay. Now, during this period, one of two things can happen. So the iBank may actually buy back some shares from the market. But if they don't, then at the end here, they will exercise the so-called over-allotment option. The so-called green shoe option, which is not really an option it's not an option in the derivative sense of the word option, okay? Now, is everyone okay so far? Yeah? So now you understand the timeline, yes? Correct, yes, yeah. Now, I did that with the last tutorial. I had a kind of distribution, but let me draw it again, okay? Now, we are now at the 53-minute point, and this part people sometimes get lost. If you might want to make a mark of this at the 34-minute and the 53-minute. Here's what happens. Here's what happens on day one, on the actual IPO day, okay? So this is the company, and this is the iBank. The company will give the iBank 1,000 million shares because that's what was disclosed in the prospectus. Now, the iBank will sell to fund A, B, C, lots and lots and lots of people. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, whatever, the list goes on. All the way to Z. Okay? And then there's the retail, by the way. Okay? So retail. Now, please remember, I'm talking day one, okay? And let's say there is a there is a cornerstone investor. Cornerstone investor. And now you know that retail will get 300. Yeah. And let's say there is a cornerstone investor out there, and one investor also buys 300 shares, okay? And then Fund A gets, now this Fund A doesn't have to be the same Fund A above, okay? So don't mix them up. This is a different Fund A. I'll call it Fund W. X, Y, and Z. So let's say Fund W buys 200 million and Fund X buys 250. What does that add up to? And Fund Y buys 100. Oh, no, there's another one down there. 50 and 50. Now, can you see what's going on? Now, first of all, when did this happen? When do these numbers, 300, 200, 250, when are these determined? These are determined 24 to 48 hours prior to, I think it's really the night before, okay? So 24 hours before the IPO, when they do the over allocation. This is, what is over allocation? This is over allocation, okay? So when you add them all up, 300, 500, 750, 800, 850, when you add them all up, you realize that it comes to 1150, correct? That means there's not enough to go around, first of all, because if you're the iBank, you've got 1,000 coming in, you've got 1150 going out. It's like you're running a bath. There's less water coming in than water going out. Then you have a problem, right? So what you do, what you can do, so you are short 150 million. So one thing you can do is you say to the cornerstone investor, because if you are a cornerstone investor, you know that there is a lock-up period where after you buy, you are not supposed to sell within 6 months anyway. Yeah, so you buy your shares. The only thing you can do is just you look at it, can't do much, okay? So you say to the cornerstone investors, all right, we know you are buying the shares, but since you can't sell anyway, how about you let us borrow, okay? So you lend us some of your shares. So when I say borrow, I really mean that, okay? I'm the cornerstone investor. I have bought these shares. These are mine. I take the risk, I take the benefits, okay? But if you want to borrow it, what does borrow mean? Borrow really means you take this piece of paper, you do whatever you want, just make sure I get it back, okay? That's borrowing. So someone can borrow these shares, so now you can actually borrow this, and at least you can do the settlement, okay? You borrow these, and you can sell them to the rest of the investor base. Okay, now that would be operationally how you handle that. And then, is everyone is okay with that? Yeah. You can borrow from the company too. Yes, you can. Yeah, that would be another way. But because, well, if it's A share, you can't. No. But I'm talking more, in a generic sense. You can borrow. Yes, you can borrow. Good point. You can borrow from the company. Yes, you can. Yeah. Why would they want to lend you the shares? He asked, and he that is a good point, because the reason there are normally, well, there is a normal reason and there's a specific reason. The normal reason they would lend you the shares is that you pay them a fee, okay? So there is an incentive for people to do so. But there is actually a second reason, which is only applicable here. The second reason is, if you are a cornerstone investor, or you are an existing major shareholder in the company itself, you have every reason to want the IPO to go well and to be successful. So you want to help when you can. Okay, it's in your interest that this thing goes smoothly. So that is on day one. All of this is on day one. Okay. Now, after that, so now what happens? So this is the company. This is the iBank. So the company has only issued 1,000, as I said, and out there. So if you think of it as, okay, now is just one big market. But if you want to think of it like this, you could say this is still the institutional. You don't have to anymore, because it's just one big market. But it started this way. And then they sold 850, but they only have 1,000 supply. So they sold 300 to the retail. They sold 700 to institutional. But, okay, what is a good way to say this? No. So they try to sell 850, but the cornerstone guy is going to lend them back. This is why they can do it, okay? Otherwise you can't do it. So they try to sell at 850. Now, when you add up all the arrows, how do they add up? So you've got 1,000 going in, you've got 850 going out, you've got 300 going out, but you got 150 coming back. Yeah? So the two sides will balance. So this will settle on day one. However, please remember that these are borrowed stocks. Borrowed. So within 21 days, the iBank will actually need to pay back the cornerstone investor, correct? You have to return them. Now, so one of two things can happen. So imagine, so this is on day one, but after this, then the iBank can either buy some shares back from the market. So now it's just one market, okay? So if you buy enough, so cumulatively, if you buy 150, then at the end of the 3 weeks, you can return back to the, I'm just, So let's say this is the cornerstone. So institution actually is 600, or what did I say? Cornerstone 300. Okay. Cornerstone 300, then this one is 550. So in 3 weeks' time, you will be able to return these stocks to them. I will write that in a different color because this is happening later. Don't worry if you don't completely understand. I think if you were to review it, the 34-minute or the 53-minute point, and you might get it. So maybe later on they buy from the market, and then they return these stocks to the cornerstone investor. Now that's one way. The other way. So now imagine 3 weeks have passed. So the cornerstone investor picks up the phone and rings the iBank. Okay, I want my shares back. Where are they? So the iBank can either say, okay, during the last 3 weeks, we have been buying shares from time to time, and now we have accumulated enough shares to pay you back, and then we will do that. Now the other way would be, thank you. So the iBank says, all right, I know we have to pay you back the shares we borrowed from you. So this is now the cornerstone investor. We don't have those shares. We will ask the company to issue some more. Now this, ladies and gentlemen, is known as exercising the green shoe or exercising the over-allotment option. Exercise over-allotment. Otherwise known as green shoe. So that actually happens. That is the last thing that happens. It's right here, okay? So now the iBank is also, it's square, but it's square via a different avenue. So they never bought anything back from the market. They simply asked the company to issue some more. Is everyone okay with that? So we have talked about over allocation. Well, first of all, the clawback, and then over allocation, and then the actual IPO itself, and then the price stabilization, which is actually a period of 21 days, and then the exercise, or I should say, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, so 5 is to repay the borrowed shares and square your books. Now, how do you do that? How? There are two ways. The first way is maybe you purchase from the market. Or maybe you exercise the green shoe. By the way, it can even be a combination of the two. As you saw in one of the assignment questions, I think it was an in-class assignment. Right? Exercise green shoe. Exercising green shoe is the same as exercising the over allotment option. It just means you have the option of going to the issuer and asking for additional shares. Is everyone okay with that? Yes. The company. Mm. 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 The over allotment option will kick in. Now, someone earlier asked whether something is mechanical. This actually happens to be mechanical because if originally 1,000 was issued and you sold 1,150, and if the iBank never bought anything from the market, then the iBank must get 150 from the company. Otherwise, they are short. They don't have enough. Okay. If the iBank actually bought, let's say, 40 from the market during the price stabilization period, then the iBank will ask for 110. So it is not really an option as such. It's not option in the derivative sense. It's an option in the sense that you don't know what the final number will be, but that number, whether it's 150 or 110 or 93, it's a balancing item to sort of plug the hole and make sure everything is square. No, the company does not have a choice. Yeah, because otherwise the settlement will fail, or the iBank doesn't have enough shares to repay the cornerstone. Because the iBank needs to repay the cornerstone investor fully. So those shares have to come from somewhere. Now, I can't keep borrowing. So that borrowing is just temporarily for just a short-term solution to make sure the settlement will take place. But after 3 weeks, we really have to settle now. And that's when the green shoe comes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Is everyone okay? Yeah. Now we spent a lot of time, but I think that it's worth it. I was I was going to go through the assignments, or at least the in-class assignments. What we can do now, I know some of you have classes. Okay, so if you need to go now, so first you can sign your attendance. But if you need to leave, or if you want to leave, feel free. But I will carry on a little bit longer, maybe another 10, 15 minutes, and it will be recorded. So later on, you can go home and you can just watch that part that you are not able to stay for. Okay. So why don't we just take a short 2-minute break, and then I'll talk a little bit about the in-class assignments. So if you need to leave, have you signed in already? Yeah. Okay. No. All right. Now I actually I got a couple of very good questions just now during the break. Can you remind me what was the first one? The first, yeah. Okay. Okay. So someone asked me, do you have to over allocate? Why is it always they allocate, they over allocate by 15%? I think you don't have to. You are not required by law to over allocate, but iBanks, they always do. They always over allocate 10 times out of 10. So it's standard market practice. And I don't have time to talk about the precise uh, economic reason, but I will do that in the next tutorial. I'll explain more to you why they do that. Okay, but iBanks are typically, it's not required by law. No, it's not required by law, but they will always do it because it is to their advantage to engage in that practice. In fact, it's not required by law, it is permitted by law. The over allocation is permitted by law. The law, you think about it. You have a prospectus. The prospectus says you are going to allocate 1,000 million shares. Now, you should really just do that. The law means whatever you say you will do, okay? But you say you will allocate 1,000 million shares and you end up allocating more, okay? It's allowed by the law. It's not compulsory, it is allowed. And then because it is allowed, everyone does it, okay? I think that's the way to look at it. Thank you for that question. Yeah. What was the second one? Okay, so the second question was, when do investors actually get the stocks and when do they pay the money? Technically, that all happens on day one, on the very first day, on IPO day, is when money will leave your pocket or leave your bank account and stocks will go into your stock account on the first day, okay? So ownership is not a joke, okay? You pay the money on that day, you get something on that day. And there is a minor detail regarding, for example, the retail investor. So the retail investor actually, if you subscribe to, let's say, 1,000 shares, I'm now talking retail. If you subscribe to 1,000 shares, then 1 week before IPO, they actually lock up your funds. They're worried you don't have money. Okay, so they lock up your funds for 1 week. And then if you only get, let's say, 200 shares, then the funds they locked up for the other 800 shares will be refunded back to you. But that's just a minor detail. I advise you sometimes when I talk to you, try to think, what is a major concept? What is a minor technical detail? So over allocation is a major concept. And exercising green shoe is a major concept. And things like where you borrow the shares from on day one. So some of you were asking, especially in the last tutorial, where do those shares come from? That to me is a minor detail. Okay, the shares come from somewhere. And then just now, I think Jackie was asking, or he was making a comment, which is good. He said the shares can also come from the company or major shareholder. Yes, it's true. Now, last time I actually said it the other way around. I said you can borrow from a major shareholder, and then someone made a comment. I thought you could borrow from a cornerstone. I said yes, you can do that too. Okay, that is the what I mean by major concept and minor detail. Okay, is everyone all right? Okay, would anyone like to ask any more questions? All right, now if you are okay with that, I actually want to go to not here. So the assignments, I think if you are comfortable doing the assignments, the in-class assignments is going to be very helpful when you tackle your homework assignment. Now, this is, I think last time we got up to so I won't go through these, they're too simple. Okay, so we already did this one, in-class assignment 2 and in-class assignment number 4. But there is actually a second part to it. There's a part 2, there is a part 2A. Now, before I dive into the details, I can tell you that these problems, they always revolve, they are variations on a theme. The theme is you have the theme is you have a company which already exists like this, and there are existing shareholders, and now maybe they want to do an IPO. Now, so like I said, one of two things can happen. So either they issue new shares. I'll draw it here. So this is what the company looked like before. So pre-IPO, it may look like this. And then after the IPO, so it can be a combination of two things. So maybe new shares are added, and then maybe the existing shareholder actually sold some of it to the general public as well. So it can be a combination. If you look at some of the notable IPOs recently, like Alibaba or Facebook, they were a combination of the two. Okay, so before the ownership may be 100% if you are the one who owns the entire company. Now afterwards, so if this is X1, so your ownership is 100%, but now your ownership is only here, but the entire company is here. Let's call this Y2. Okay, so when you need to determine just exactly how much you own, there's the numerator, there's the denominator. So the denominator will always be the total number of shares. So if there has been new shares issued, then the total number of shares would be Y2, of course. Okay. If there are no new shares issued, and this was the case with Prada, okay, then the denominator actually stays the same, and it's just that you sold maybe a part of your holding. So X2 will be here, the numerator. But otherwise, so don't think these are complicated. So when you draw diagrams, you find that no, they're not really complicated. So here it will be X2. So you just got to figure out what this part is, and then what that part is. Okay. Is everyone okay with that? So when you look at this question, so once you have figured out what the denominator should be, which is the y parameter here, that normally doesn't change, and I can show you here. So here you've got a company which had oh, I have to go all the way back here. Yeah. So you see that the company actually it had 1,200 shares. I'm gonna stop. I'm not gonna keep saying million all the time. So it had 1,200 shares, and then it is going to issue another 350 million new shares. Okay. Okay, so in this case, what they've done is they issued some new shares for the IPO, which is 350 million new shares, but there's also a 15% of over allocation, which is 52.5. Now you add all these up. So these are the old shares, the new shares for sale, and then the over allocation. Notice that this number actually appears everywhere. So once you have worked that out, and make sure you get it right, okay? Basically, you use that, all over the place, regardless of, whether it's CS or PE or the public, okay? So these questions are not really hard. In fact, I knocked out a spreadsheet which I have already uploaded to Blackboard. So you'd find that under reference material. Now, this is a reinterpretation of the solutions that were provided to you by Paul McGuinness. And I've got assignment number, in-class assignment 2, and then in-class assignment 4, part 1, and then part 2 was the one that we were going over just now. Now, these numbers, some of them have formulas behind them. So you can try and figure out by just tracing the cells. I think it's not really very helpful. I go through all these numbers with you. It's because in the end, it's like playing the piano. I can teach you all the keys, okay, but in the end, you have to play it yourself. So this is a little bit the same. So feel free to go in and have a look. And the same for part 2A. That is this question, this one here. Okay. The only difference is that the over allotment option is exercised fully on EDF and not EDF and CS. Okay, so the numbers are a little bit different, but the concept doesn't change. And if you want to figure out, if you can't figure out what's going on here, which I don't think is that hard, okay, you can come to the spreadsheet and you get the same answers, okay. So these are all formulas, as you can see. This one is already on Blackboard. Now, I want to quickly go to assignment. So there's 5, 6, and 7. Now 5, something like this, I won't because it's too simple. Okay, but number 6. So let's take a very quick look at that. So here's a typical IPO situation where there were 1,800 shares already existed, and 75% of that is owned by majority shareholder and the other quarter by minority. You then organize an IPO where there is a primary offer, so new shares. Every time I see primary, I'm thinking new. That word must appear somewhere. Okay, so new shares 500, and a secondary offer of 200, of which 150 comes from the major shareholder and 50 from the minor. Now, without looking further, I kind of can figure out. I always like drawing these things because it makes things so clear. So first of all, before there's 1,800, of which 450. So 450 is the minor shareholder. So 1,350 is the major shareholder, and then they are going to sell an additional 500 new shares, and they are going to sell 200 old shares, of which 50 will come from the minor shareholder and 150 will come from the major shareholder. Now, I just looked at the question and deliberately I switched it off and I tried to reinterpret it in diagram form. Have I got it right? Is that correct? You can see it's not hard. It's not hard. Okay. So what is the? I don't even know what the question is. Okay, but already I just look at that and I figure out. All right, majority guy. First of all, what is the denominator? It has to be 2,300. Because it's 1,800 plus 500, so that's not going to change, okay? And then their ownership will be 1,200. Minority guy, 400. What's the denominator? Same number. Just write it down, okay? So the general public, what's their ownership? Well, I know that one, but it has to be, so now the total, now the total would be 2,300. And here there's 1,600, so it has to be 7. Something like that. Is everyone okay? Now, let's see what the question is. There's a green shoe. Okay. Okay, so I simplified things. The final is compute majority's equity interest after full over allotment option exercise. Now, so please note that because we are talking over allotment option exercise, not talking about over allocation, which happened way before, 3 weeks earlier. Okay, so this is actually the last thing to do. So what will happen to them is that originally they had 1,300. So we know they're going to be getting rid of this, but they also have to sell an additional 15%. Now, 22.5 is 15% of 150. So when the iBank goes to the issuer and say, can we have more shares? These can be new shares, but these can also be shares from the existing shareholder. Okay. So this is I massively simplified things in my notes because I didn't think of the green shoe, but the question is more testing than that. So you add this, you add that, and then you add this is the green shoe this is the over allocation on the entire amount of new shares. To do this question properly, you do have to read the small print here. Assume full green shoe exercise results in the issuance of 75 million new shares by GSR, 75, and the sale of a further 30 million existing shares with majority and minority contributing respective 22.5 and 7.5 to the secondary sale. Okay, so that is the important detail. So the new shares would increase by 500 plus a 15% over allocation on 500. That's the increase, but the actual number of shares that are sold to the public would be this plus, thank you, the 200 from the existing shareholders plus 200 times an over allocation on the 200. Okay, so you've got to be careful to figure out what's going on. But anyway, this is on the this is in class assignment number 6, which I actually have put on the Excel spreadsheet. Okay. Now assignment 7 actually is also quite simple, and so this is when a red chip wants to make a global offer, and there's a primary offer of 1,000 shares. Primary. So when I see primary, I'm thinking new. Okay, these are new shares. So it's going to be 90 and 10. So 10% to the public offer and 90%. You see, it's called placing tranche sometimes. Placing tranche. Before the offer, there are 3,200 shares, old shares, all held by the company, the state-owned enterprise. All of these will list alongside a global offer upon IPO completion. And then suppose they want to apply the share reduction policy and transfer some money to the securities fund. when the IPO is done, okay? So what's going on here? Now, for part one, they're asking what is the percentage that will be, what is the ownership after the IPO, okay? Now here it is interesting because there are 3,200 old shares. There will be 1,000 new shares. Now you would think that there is 150 million of over allocation. So this number here of the additional over allocation should be 150. It is not. It is 80, and it is 80 because the global coordinator actually bought some of it back. That's what I was trying to tell you. Yeah, exactly. It's a partial green shoe exercise. Remember when we were talking about this, I said you can purchase from market, you can exercise, you can have a combination of the two. That's what they've done. So they bought 70 from the market. They're going to exercise green shoe for 80. So that also is possible, and that is exactly what has happened here. Okay? And then when there are new shares issued, so the original share that the government entity will park some of it away or surrender 10% to the security fund. So that is 100 million on 1,000 or 8 million on 80. Okay, so that's where that came from. So this is the important number, clearly. If you get this number right, then, you know, everything else will probably be right. And then this is the 72.24, which is this number here. Okay, so I've already done the spreadsheet for you. Now, actually, have a look at that. And so like I said, it's like playing the piano. I can't teach you to play the piano, but I do want to, actually, there was one last part to that question, which was quite meaningful, and I nearly forgot. Okay, so besides, I cannot figure out the meaning of clawback and over allocation. I hope you are better now, okay? Why do we need a clawback? You need a clawback. The purpose of the clawback is, okay, so there's a, between the institutional and the retail, they both want shares. The idea of the clawback is if there is a lot of demand from the retail, then you want to try and shift some of it. So give the retail investors a chance, okay? That's why you need to, that's why you do the clawback, all right? Why the over allocation is good for every party? I just think that over allocation may cause a dilution effect on a controller shareholder if global coordinators choose to exercise the green shoe to close out. Do you understand the question? Even if you don't have the answer. Now, I think when you do an IPO, if you were the original controller and your equity looked like this, when you do an IPO, either by selling part of your holdings or by issuing new shares, either way, the moment you contemplate doing an IPO, you are diluting your ownership. By construction, you must be. Otherwise, don't sell. Okay? So I think if you do an IPO, you are diluting your ownership anyway. Okay? Now, I tell you what is the good thing about over allocation. You get more funds, okay? You get more money, either more money in your pocket or more money for the company, okay? But actually there is a second very subtle purpose for the over allocation and for the green shoe. I'll tell you about that next time, okay? But what I want to say is, so you are diluting your ownership anyway, but the point being, if you were previously a 100% owner and now you are 70, you still have control. It's only when your ownership drops below 50, then you might be threatened. Okay, so you might not be all that worried. Okay, so strictly speaking, this statement is correct. But if you own 100%, sometimes that's not a good thing. You don't have to control a company by owning 100% or even 80. Okay, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So diluting your ownership, yes, but it doesn't mean you lose control. Okay. So the first reason over allocation is good is that you get more money. Okay. But there is another there's another reason now I'll talk to you about. It's to do with price stabilization. Okay. I think I will. Okay. There is one more slide that I was going to show you. So today we talked about all of these, the IPO process and the timeline. We talked about oversubscription. We talked about over allocation, which happens before an IPO. Exercising the green shoe, which happens after, in fact, substantially after, 21 days after. Okay. Now, just to close out, over allocation versus over allotment. So don't get confused. Over allocation happens before an IPO. It is intended, it is deliberate, and it's perfectly legal. It is allowed, it is done. Okay? It is not needed, but it's almost always done by iBanks and issuers. And then, so I say here, so you create more demand than a supply, and because there was additional demand, so you sell 1,150, that's the demand, but you only have 1,000 supply. So the iBanks are short intentionally. You have to cover that short position. Either you buy back from the market, or you ask the issuer to issue more or sell more. In that case, it's called exercising the over allotment option. Sometimes it can be a combination, just like in that in-class assignment question. Okay. I'm going to stop here and let you go. I think I've talked enough, and I talk anymore, you're not going to be able to take it in. I hope that was helpful, and please don't be late today to class, because you need to hand your assignment in at 2:30 or before. Okay? So thank you everyone for listening to me, and see you in the afternoon.